All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Capabilities webinar. If I could just ask everyone to make sure that their phones and computers are on mute, that will eliminate all of the background noise. My name is Casey Williams. I am the events manager here at ECI. Before we get into the details for this webinar, for those who are not familiar with ECI, the Ethics and Compliance Initiative is a best practice community of organizations that are committed to creating and sustaining high quality ethics and compliance programs. We provide research and a best practice community, as well as certification opportunities for ethics and compliance professionals. If you are interested in learning more about our work or membership, please reach out to Tia Berry. That's tia@ethics.org. This one-hour presentation is on one of ECI's Fellows Working Groups, Capabilities Building. Led by the co-chairs of this group, members of the group, and E&C practitioners, they will be talking with you all about the development of the report known as Essential Skills and Qualities of the Ethics and Compliance Professional Today and in the Future. Their focus will be outlining the current and future skills and qualities of effective ethics and compliance professionals. A little background of ECI's working groups. In an effort to encourage networking and collaboration among our members, we do offer multiple working group opportunities based on particular issues that are driven by member interest. The purpose of these groups are to help ECI members learn from one another via dialogue and through the sharing of resources. They are driven by a shared goal to produce a practical, action-oriented deliverable that will be available for all of ECI members. A few more things here. So for those of you who have not used the Zoom platform before, we do have a bunch of people logging in today. So I did go ahead and have everyone be on mute. So please just make sure you are on mute if you are not a speaker. And then we will be using the chat function, which is at the bottom of your screen to the right. Any questions that you have throughout this presentation, please feel free to put those in there. At the end, we will have the Q&A session. This is a recorded webinar, so it will be available to view on our website about a week after today. Also, this webinar is worth 1 CEU credit, so if you are needing credit, please indicate that in the post-event evaluation that I will be sending to you after this webinar. So I will hand it over to Matt.
Thank you so much, Casey. This is Matt Gilley with St. Mary's University. On behalf of my other two working group co-leaders, Steve Guyman with Eli Lilly and Christopher Michelson with the University of St. Thomas, it's truly my pleasure to welcome you to today's webinar. Today we'll be talking about the results of the study and white paper we've just wrapped up called Essential Skills and Qualities of the Ethics and Compliance Professional Today and in the Future. Next slide, please. Can we get to the next slide?
It should be up. Is it not up?
All I'm seeing is the is slide 1. Just the title slide.
Okay, give me 1 second.
Well, I'll continue while Casey's bringing up the slides. The next slide was just the agenda there. That's perfect. Thank you, Casey. We're taking a somewhat unique approach to the webinar. In a moment, I'll hand things off to Steve for a few minutes so he can share with you details about the objectives and the scope of the working group and the report itself. Then Steve will hand off to Christopher, who will discuss what we're calling 5 defining questions for the ethics and compliance profession. Following Christopher's discussion, Karen with ECI will talk about some of the report's statistical highlights, and then comes the really interesting or unique part. We've invited a number of ethics and compliance leaders and practitioners as well as another academician and a representative from ECI to share what the report's findings mean for them and for those in their corner of the E&C profession. And then finally, we'll have several minutes for Q&A. Many thanks to each of our speakers today, and for those of you who are on joining the webinar, our goal is to have this wrapped up in 1 hour. And with that, I'll turn things over to Steve.
Okay, thank you, Matt. Casey, if we could go to the next slide, please. My name is Steve Guyman. I'm with Eli Lilly and Company Pharmaceuticals, and I have been very fortunate to have Matt Gilley and Christopher Michelson as my partners in crime as we went on this journey. And this all started almost 2 years ago. In January of 2018, we started having a discussion at the Ethics Compliance Initiative Fellows meeting and started a discussion on what are the capabilities that are going to be necessary to really assure we have an effective ethics compliance program, and what are they now, and what are they going to need to be in the future. And so that really got to what our problem statement was, that was the genesis of this working group, which kicked off in mid-2018. And that was that there's really not a well-established standard for the skills and capabilities necessary to support the effectiveness of an ethics compliance program. Ethics compliance, as we all know, is a relatively new profession. It's generated out of the federal sentencing guidelines from October of 1991, and different organizations have found different ways to implement that. But our goal was to be able to say, how do we get an understanding of the current range of tasks and positions and capabilities, and what needs to be done to develop the essential skills for each of these roles? So we started by focusing in on what are the capabilities and competencies, and then the professional qualifications, both from a skill-wise and interaction and influence-wise. And our intent is to be able to say, how do we identify the current state of these capabilities? And then how do we help to influence a common standard going forward of the skills necessary for the ever-increasing requirements for an effective ethics compliance program? So next slide, please. So we started it off with our capabilities working group. So we kicked off the capabilities working group in the summer of 2018, and we started brainstorming, and we came up with the previous slide you saw, where we used, some of us had Six Sigma methodology, so we tried to say, what's the problem statement, what's our goal, what do we want to get to? And we determined that we needed a couple groups to really help us. So we put together a group of individuals who really started going through what are the current capabilities and expectations. And we had a group who took a look at the various external requirements specific to ethics compliance, but also specific to allied functions, in saying, what does it take to really have necessary skills? So the ethics compliance started with the federal sentencing guidelines, used the UK Bribery Act, the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development anti-corruption guidelines, SEC resource guidelines, DOJ guidelines that are ever changing at this point since we've started. But we also started looking to say, how do we look at those professions that have had well-established expectations of the standards? So CPA licensure and the US CPA International Qualifications Examinations were two surrogates we used to be able to say, what does it take to actually consistently qualify staff on a global basis? So after we got that, then we had a team of professionals who worked to develop, implement, and analyze our survey data. And so we were very fortunate to have 490 respondents. We had 368 complete responses, 122 partial, and it was a really diverse group that had a lot of distribution across various roles and various organizations. So we felt that we had a pretty good sample of what the current state of the profession was. And that's the data that we used to go ahead and establish this white paper that's the topic of discussion today. Next slide, please. So if we stop and say very quickly, where are we going? Well, currently, this is the first report that we know of that has really tried to take a snapshot of the current state of the essential capabilities of an ethics compliance professional, what's needed now, and most importantly, what's going to be needed in the future. So as we look at this, we're really trying to look to say, how do we look at degrees and certifications of the profession today? One of the things you'll see as we go through slides of our various presenters today, we'll put up what a summary of their degrees and those who have certifications, what they are. Our experiencers are highly varied and very different, and there's not that standardization of expectations currently like there is for a certified public accountant, for example. One of the more important areas we want to look at was the leadership qualities. So how do we look at the leadership qualities at all levels, and what are the expectations for influence? And also, what are the essential roles that are required for an effective program today, and what do we think they'll be in the future? We're in a world of data analytics. That's becoming ever more important, but we're still in a world where personal influence and the ability to go ahead and drive others to achieve common results is very important. So how do we quantify that? So looking at all of that, we want to understand again what the current expectations for the skills and qualities are for a successful E&C professional, and likewise a program, and where are we now and where do we need to go in the next 5 to 10 years, okay? So next slide, please. I want to say a giant thank you to all those people with their names on here, and many of you who are on this call who don't have your name on here. We wouldn't have been able to work through this point if it hadn't have been a lot of free time that people had donated and just terrific collaboration and partnership by all those that are on this list. So once again, on behalf of Matt and Christopher and the ECI team, I just want to say a giant thank you for everyone who helped in this effort. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Christopher to really talk us through some of the key questions that we're working through from a profession.
Thank you, Steve. And let me reiterate my thanks to everyone. So we are going to slide 9 now, 5 defining questions for the ethics and compliance profession. If you took the survey, you might recall that the questions covered numerous themes: education, expertise, personal and leadership qualities, functional areas, time allocation, career advancement, and professional engagement. In the appendix of the report, there are some interesting graphs and supplemental analysis on each of these themes. But the main body of the report identifies these 5 questions that you see that will define how the ethics and compliance profession evolves into the future. And we've identified 3 key audiences, each of which will be represented in this webinar today, that can each consider and use the answers to these questions in different ways. Leaders of ethics and compliance teams who are interested in the composition and professional development of those teams, ethics and compliance practitioners who may be interested in their own job satisfaction and career advancement, and ethics and compliance educators and professional associations like ECI. The answer to every one of the questions on this page is, it depends, but I'll add some more helpful advice over the next few minutes. Slide 10 now. Should ethics and compliance professionals become specialists or generalists? Well, there's no one-size-fits-all answer to whether the best ethics and compliance professionals are good at everything or great at one thing. If you run a large organization in a heavily regulated industry, you might have the luxury to build some specialty functions within your team in data analytics, investigations, policy development, training, etc. But you'd also benefit from having some generalists, perhaps even yourself in a leadership position, who can see the forest. In less regulated industries or smaller organizations, of course, the luxury to specialize might be more limited, and the need for generalists might be greater. Next slide, 11. Should ethics and compliance focus on tactics or strategy? We often hear that E&C professionals are busy enough simply carrying out tactical program management, but we also heard from survey respondents that they think they ought to be more involved in defining the ethical mission and values of the organization. In other words, they should have a seat at the strategy table when it comes to important questions of strategic ethics, like whether to enter a controversial product category or a historically corrupt geographic market, to enter into a merger, and so on. For an E&C organizational leader, earning a seat at that strategy table requires being seen as more than a program manager. Next slide, 12. Do I need a JD? That's a question a lot of E&C practitioners are asking themselves, and here's our answer. Today, it will probably open more doors for you than it will close, but if you want to be an E&C practitioner long into the future, An E&C specialist credential, which is a growing category, might help you do your job better. Law degrees might teach you a lot about the underlying standards of E&C, but they won't teach you as much as a specialist degree might about executing your E&C job responsibilities, like project management, human relations, technology, and so on, which might also be useful in non-E&C careers. Next slide, 13. With growing technological automation and the rise of data analytics, as Steve was saying, should E&C practitioners seek to cultivate their technological prowess or their soft skills? Ideally both, but there's a partially true stereotype that tech geeks aren't so good at the social stuff and that people aren't so good at the tech stuff. Here's what we found. E&C leaders will always need integrity, critical thinking, and listening skills. But even if they're not tech specialists, there's a growing need for E&C practitioners to be able to work with technology specialists in order to understand the potential for technology to do E&C work more efficiently and effectively. Next slide, 14. Finally, should I go into E&C for love or for money? What we found is that a lot of you go into it for love and that some of you feel underpaid. Here's the problem. If you're willing to do E&C for love rather than money, then you'll get paid less because they can pay you less. And in business organizations in which pay is sometimes commensurate with prestige, being paid less reduces the esteem in which E&C is held, which makes it harder for you to advance professionally. So we think there's work to do to advance the professional stature of E&C. In other words, it's nice that you're in this profession for love, but it shouldn't come at the expense of money. Over to you, Karen.
Good afternoon, everyone. This is Karen Wessels with the ECI. I am a senior survey researcher here, and I was heavily involved in the analytic portion of this study. And Evelyn Essen, our VP of Research, unfortunately can't be with us today, but she certainly helped guide our end of the analysis of this quite robust data set. Next slide, please. So at the very beginning, Steve actually provided some background on the survey development and methodology. So I don't want to go into too much of that, but I did want to add that most of the 500 survey respondents were ECI members, but we also invited people to participate through social media, and our working groups use their professional networks to further fill out our sample members. So this enabled us to get quite a robust sample of E&C professionals. So the first thing I wanted to talk about, an interesting statistic we found, was that although the majority of respondents were female, 64%, there were significantly fewer females in top management than males. Unfortunately, we can't explain why this gender disparity occurred in this particular study, but it's certainly something that ECI plans on keeping in mind as we administer and collect data for future pulse surveys on similar content. Next slide, please. So something that was discussed early on in this presentation is that one of the goals of our research was to determine what are the current qualifications of E&C professionals and where do we expect those to go. So currently, what educational degrees do our E&C professionals have, and what educational degrees do we think will become quite valuable 5 to 10 years from now? So something we found was that a bachelor's or a master's degree specializing in E&C is kind of rare right now. Only 8% of respondents said they had this sort of specialized bachelor's or master's degree. But if you look on the right-hand column, you'll see that 76% of respondents felt that this sort of specialized degree is going to be one of the most valuable educational requirements in the future. And the same is true if you go to the bottom of that same table. The same is true for professional certificates in E&C. Although only 23% of respondents said they currently hold this sort of professional certificate, 69% indicated that they felt that this was going to be something that would be quite valuable for an E&C professional to have in the future. So that's very exciting for ECI as well, since we actually provide an LPEC, which is our leadership professional in ethics and compliance, and it sort of gives us that reassurance that providing this professional certificate is something that's really valued by the profession. So perhaps something unexpected is, at least from ECI's standpoint, is that law degrees may be perceived as even more valuable in the future than they are today. 23% of our respondents said they have a law degree, but 43% anticipated that that will be one of the most valuable educational qualifications for E&C professionals in the next 5 to 10 years. We certainly didn't anticipate that there would be a decrease in the value, but we sort of anticipated that would probably remain relatively stable over time. So this is something that we anticipate we'll dive into a little bit deeper in future studies. Next slide, please. So given that the results stood out for these law degrees becoming more valuable in the next 5 to 10 years, I wanted to take a moment to look at the background of those who indicated law degrees are the most valuable currently. So if you look on the left, we're comparing by management level, and on the right, we're comparing by tenure in the E&C profession. So although there was pretty much no disparity by management level, as tenure increased, the percentage of respondents indicating that a law degree is the most valuable educational requirement increased. So it was interesting to see this, given that those in top management roles are more likely to be the ones with the most tenure. In other words, we would have anticipated that if a law degree becomes more valued as tenure increases, that the same would be true as one moves up the quote-unquote totem pole. So this is another area that will be further explored by ECI in future research efforts. And now I'll hand it off to Susan Montgomery and Jeffrey Oak, who will share something interesting they got out of our report on the E&C capability study and how they may use this information in their future organizational strategy or operations.
Thank you, Karen. This is Jeff Oak, and I appreciate this report and the significance of the data that it's pulled together and the opportunity to be with you. As an organizational leader in ethics and compliance, what's in the report for me? What resonated for me is question number 4 of the key questions. Should ethics and compliance focus on tactical excellence or strategic influence? And for me, this is a fabulous, fabulous question that really cuts at the heart of our shared work. Both tactics and strategy are important aspects, in my view, of being effective in this role. They are a polarity, a kind of both and. As E&C professionals, we need to think globally and act locally, by which I mean think big picture and pay attention to the details in our daily work. I would not want to suggest that one of these is more important than the other. Much of our work requires us to go into the weeds. Much of it fits into what my colleague Joan Dubinsky has called the firefighting aspect of the E&C role, reacting to situations, managing crises, putting out fires. This is the domain of the tactical. By way of contrast, there is also the public health aspect of our roles, by which I mean attending to the long-term health of the organization, advocating for good ethical hygiene, and in the words of one of the call-outs in the report, not just saving the organization, but working to make the organization worth saving. This is the domain of the strategic, and both are extremely important dimensions of our work. Having said that, in recent years in my own practice, I've been giving more attention to the strategic part of this polarity, to organizational public health, if I can put it that way. I think there are 2 factors that have influenced me in this direction. First, the organization where I've been privileged to hang my hat for the last 14 years has the kind of soil that is conducive to growing the seeds of a strong culture. In addition, I've been very fortunate to be positioned in the organizational structure in such a way that I've had the opportunity to bring influence upward and help cultivate good ethical hygiene within the organization. And secondly, as I've continued to grow and evolve my practice of it as an ethics compliance professional, I've come to see that strategic influence within the organization is an important frontier, a place to further extend the contributions that I believe our profession can make. Most of us doing this work are good at the details. That's how we're wired. it's our comfort zone. And I think we need to give a little more attention to developing our strategic muscles. In the interest of strengthening those muscles, let me just share a few lessons learned. With respect to the strategy of your company, I encourage all ethics and compliance professionals to step out of our comfort zone, to look for opportunities to engage in the strategic work of the organization, perhaps by volunteering for a work group unrelated to your day-to-day activities, but which is important to the broader enterprise of the company. Or maybe it's having lunch with someone from the strategy function and asking them to tell you about their work. And above all, to bring a teachable spirit to our work at all times. And with respect to the strategy of your E&C function, again, I would encourage all of us to step out of our comfort zone. Rather than telling the organization what it needs to do, rather stop, look, and listen for what the organization needs you to do. And this may require different approaches, different capabilities, different deliverables that previous speakers have already touched on. So in closing, think globally and act locally. Be both a firefighter and a public health officer. Focus on both saving the organization from crises and help make your organization the kind of organization that's worth saving. Suzanne?
Thank you, Jeff. If you could turn to the next slide, please. I'm going to pick up where Jeff left off in the discussion on strategy. The piece of the report that was most compelling to me was Table 3 that's on page 20 of the report, and it's up on the slide here. These are the skills that were found to be the most essential for success today and in the future 5 to 10 years from now. There is one potential anomaly in the data where the data on skills needed shows law as falling off the top 10 list, but the data on the education shows law as increasing in importance, which may be worthy of some further investigation. And I point that out because as we look at the skills that the study found needed for the future, we need to rethink our own skills development paths as well as those of our teams. The three that I see as critical that are perhaps new and emerging are data analytics, technology, and as Jeff just spoke to you extensively about strategy development and planning. We also see a boost in privacy and data protection, and I personally believe that's triggered by some of the legislative and regulatory activity out there. And my guess is that's just increasing in importance month over month, and we can't wait 5 years for that. I'd like to use the balance of my time to talk to you about how, from an organizational leadership perspective, one might go about a skills transformation, because it's not something you can expect your team to do overnight. If you could turn to the next slide, please. This is a skeleton of what a 3-year plan might be. The first step is you need to assess the skills that are needed for your team and needed in the future. This would involve being a part of the strategy with your business, as Jeff spoke with you about. It would involve inventorying the skills that you currently have on your team. You may have hired employees for a specific need, and lo and behold, they have a skill that they're not currently utilizing that's a skill you need for the future. Then you need to mash them together and see where the gaps fall and develop your strategic plan for skill building. You can begin your skills transformation the latter half of year 1 or beginning in year 2. And also think about filling skill gaps with strategic hiring. You may not be able to teach, for example, the data analytics skills you need for the team that you currently have. So think about when you have an opportunity to hire, do you hire for that skill in addition to the immediate need that you have? And then investigate tools to incorporate the technology and data analytics in the function. There's a bit of, if you build it, they will come mentality, or the chicken and the egg, pick your metaphor, on having the technology ready at the time you have the skills ready, at the time you have the data. So as part of your strategic 3-year planning, think about tools plus skills. And then in year 3, perhaps you might consider building, continuing your skills transformation, and then starting to introduce those data analytics into your ethics and compliance work. Again, this is just a straw man for a possible 3-year plan. You would need to look at where your business is, where it's going, where your department is, and where it's going, and building a plan that makes sense for you. But my message, both from my own experience and from reading the report, is don't expect it to happen overnight. And if you're strategic about it, you can be successful in this skills transformation to guide your team from the current skills to the skills of the future that this report shows. And then the next slide, please. There will be things that will just be continuously part of the work that you'll be leading. First, mitigate all risk, as much risk as you can on change management, communicating with transparency with your team. Tell them what skills you're looking for in the future. Give them the opportunity and the time. I know we're all busy to do a skills pivot and a skills transformation. Continuously understand the current business and strategic plans for your organization. Jeff spoke extensively about that. And then be strategic in assessing the skill needs. Think about, what do you need today, what do you need tomorrow, and what do you need in the future? And that will always be a continuous exercise. In sum, I found this report to be very useful and very important from an organizational perspective, and thinking about positioning the function to be successful with the business in the future. So thank you very much.
All right, I'm up. Hi, everybody. Thanks for having me. John Ackman. I work for U.S. Bank. I fall into the practitioner part of the conversation. On the slide, the main questions for us, or for me, that I was looking at, what's in the report for me? The report and the subject matter of the questions that we asked in the survey are personal for me. I'm mid-career. I truly enjoy the work that I'm doing, but I don't have a JD. And so the question kind of pops up in my head is like, am I topped out? Do I need to find a different career path? What does the future hold? It was interesting for me to see that the findings suggest that the JD is important and will remain important in the future. However, I'm excited to see that the respondents indicated that over the next 5 to 10 years, as programs continue to evolve and mature, the law degree or a law degree will not be a prerequisite for advancement. Specialized certifications or specialized advanced degrees are up and coming and becoming more and more important. Transitioning to the next sentence, or the next question, how will I use or act upon the report for my professional development? I really like what Jeff was talking about. The strategic versus tactical, that just jumped out at me. Early in my career, I focused on tactical day-to-day operations. For example, how do I engage individual employees? As I become more, or the group has become more embedded in the organization, we've naturally and organically been pulled into more business strategy conversations. And unfortunately, at this point, it's been an after the fact. I'm thinking of M&A, it's mergers and acquisitions. It's okay, we're now merging. John, how do we train them? How do we bring them up to speed? As months go on, we find out that, oh my goodness, this is not a good cultural fit. What I'm hoping to do is become more embedded and become more aware of the direction of the organization. It's building that business acumen, if you will, of the organization, so you can work to become consulted on the front end. My main hope is to have a place at the table, understanding the strategy, having my partners understand the value or the lens that the ethics and global ethics office compliance functions can provide for those types of conversations. So with that, I'm going to turn over to Casey. Jessica Chernohoy, unfortunately, is on maternity leave, but she prepared some written remarks that Casey will read for the group. Casey?
Thank you, John. I learned a lot from those working in the ethics and compliance field as we created this report. First, I learned how diverse our backgrounds are in this profession. Although we assume that most come into the profession from a legal background, we actually saw a lot of variation in entry to the profession, with people working in sales, audit, HR, and accounting roles before joining E&C roles. Our work can only improve the more diverse perspectives we have involved. How we enter into this profession continues to evolve as well and will evolve into the future, which is exciting. The research on whether the JDs required supplements this conversation, and for the first time, we heard that the profession foresees a shift to more specialized E&C degrees at all levels in the coming years, not just through JD programs. I can't wait to see a new batch of graduate and undergraduate students interested in the profession and for us to begin catering our roles and opportunities toward a different type of professional as our programs and strategies evolve alongside this shift. The other area to point out from this report that particularly stands out is the detail sought on how we perceive the importance of our own work. As one individual quoted, E&C is a perfect blending of head and heart. We are in a unique position to use our soft skills as defining capabilities that make us successful at work. I feel lucky to work in a profession that values integrity, communication skills, collaboration, and trustworthiness to be of utmost value and to get to practice these positives. I urge readers to reflect on and ask colleagues and teams about the key questions to consider that we have listed within the data. These conversations could be extremely fruitful in terms of applying the findings of this study in your workplace and understanding how they resonate with E&C audiences. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. My name is Emily Sexton, and I am 3 years into my career, ethics and compliance career at Lilly. Thank you for inviting me to share my thoughts today. The report covered such a variety of professional aspects, but like Suzanne, the results of the most valued expertise currently and in the future stood out to me the most. I was surprised to see law drop out of the top 10 most essential skills for the future, but I think the thought behind that is the deeper specialization in different areas that could relate to law. For example, privacy, which we saw the increase in the table that Suzanne shared. The diversity in skills for ethics and compliance professionals, I think will be increasing in the future as we're seeing. And as Karen highlighted, the value of a law degree in the profession isn't going away. From where I am in my career, I think that I've made the decision to apply to law school to build that foundation. I think that it's going to help in my journey to be a professional in this field. There currently are some great business ethics programs out there paving the way, but just where I am right now, and I have the opportunity to take advantage of the JD opportunity, and so that's where I'm at right now.
Okay. Great. Thank you, Emily. And this is Steve Guyman, and it's very interesting to just listen to these three perspectives of John of a mid-career, Jessica as still a early/mid-career, and Emily as a very early career. And I think one of the things that Emily and I have had a series of discussions about here at Lilly is she's looking to make ethics compliance her home function for the rest of her career. Mm-hmm. And when you look at an individual in mid-20s, looking at very, very long runway, how does she already take her master's in library information and science, and which is proven to be extremely valuable in ethics compliance when we start talking about technology and data analytics, and how does she prepare herself for some of the leadership opportunities we think she has going forward? So again, this whole question of to be JD or not to be JD continues to come around. The other aspect is, John has an external certification from outside of the ECI. I actually have one from outside the ECI. I have the LPEC with ECI. And part of the discussion we want to be able to have our next speaker frame up for us, and that would be Ernie Broughton, and also representing Paul Fiorelli from Xavier University is, so how do academic institutions and the professional societies respond to the current needs and our path forward? So Ernie, I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it. And congratulations on a wonderful report. I think that this is truly groundbreaking, I don't think there's anything else like it out there, and I think it significantly moves the conversation forward in terms of capability building, which I find is on a lot of people's minds as I work in the practitioner community. First of all, just commenting on some things that Paul had provided me, and he thought that the high response rate on the survey was outstanding and promising for conducting future surveys like this. As an academic, he was, I think, very interested in the focus on technology and data analytics and AI. Also kind of coupled with the importance of organizational psychology or behavior and behavioral ethics. And he paid attention, I think, as an academic to the interest in professional certificates, which I think is broadly an area that a lot of business people are interested in, is certificates on specialized knowledge that are supplemental to a formal 4-year degree or master's level program. He also found it interesting in terms of how people felt about prestige, pay, and professionalism, and the passion that we have for this work. But also, it's easy to get typecast in doing this. And my experience in the ethics field goes back about 20 years, and I can tell you that that was always a concern. And in fact, probably at that time, there was a lot of conversation about that the only people who got into ethics and compliance were the ones who were satisfied that this was the last job they will ever have with the company. And there were lots of reasons for that. But I do think that ethics and compliance somewhat mirrors human resources, and that organizations have to be intentional about rotating people in and out of these. They've got to see the business value of it. And I think also that ethics and compliance practitioners have to demonstrate their the relevance of their skills to other functions. I do know that line experience is valued in ethics and compliance, but sometimes it can be difficult to find a path back from ethics and compliance into line functions, which is a good reason that some of us see this as more of a calling for us, and not just the latest position that we fill. As I think about my own reflections on the data, I was I guess surprised that there was a trend away from the liberal arts focus in statistics of interest in terms of the future, going from 59% current to 32%, because I think liberal arts is probably a good preparation for this kind of field, but it's interesting that not everybody sees it that way. Also, I thought that the increase from in specializations in compliance ethics was astounding, going from 8% currently to 76% in 5 to 10 years. And I think there's a lot that we have to do in academia to catch up with that perceived demand. It's just not out there right now. I did think also that the professional certificate and the increase of that from 23% to 69% in 5 to 10 years, I think that's a clear path of where people want to go. People want to get certifications that are current and relevant in areas that provide value, that signify that they have this kind of expertise, and I think that we're behind in terms of developing those certificates. Just a couple of other comments that I'd like to make. I found it very interesting that technology and strategy development and data analytics made the list in 5 to 10 years, and we're not on the list right now. And particularly in terms of strategy development, one of the first principle of our high quality ethics and compliance program, Blue Ribbon Panel Report, the ECI, is ethics and compliance is central to business strategy. And so it's interesting that people are seeing the importance of that. On the other hand, one thing that surprised me was that project management fell out of the top 10, as well as communications and law. and I think project management is certainly a valuable and relevant skill. I'm not sure what to make of that result. When I look at this trend toward data and business analytics, my understanding from what I've seen in the field and what I'm seeing is that through machine learning and AI, that a lot of the data analysis is not going to be done by people, but more by systems, and that will track with an increasing importance of soft skills. That's my perception. And people skills and emotional intelligence, communication, and teamwork. I think one of the opportunities here is I'd like to get a lot more insight into the soft skills that are really necessary for people to be successful in this field. And for those of us who have been practicing a long time, is it because we have these soft skills, or because we are typecasting, aren't seen as being able to do anything else? I don't think that's true, because there are people who have moved out of compliance and ethics into CEO and C-suite positions. And I'm looking forward to seeing that more in the future. But I do think that understanding the soft skills, because as we look at the trajectory of positions, there was just an top 10 emerging jobs list on LinkedIn. Number 1 is AI specialist. Number 2, robotics engineer. Number 3, data scientist. Number 4, full stack engineer. Number 5, site reliability engineer. Out of the top 10, there are only 3 jobs that are not really technology and data driven. And so I'm not surprised that we're always also going to see that trajectory within the ethics and compliance space. But I think that soft skills are really going to emerge as critical, and I'd like to know which ones are the most related to the impact that we have in the organization. So thank you for the opportunity to provide opinion on what I think is really a groundbreaking study. Congratulations to you all.
Okay, that's great, Ernie. We have a series of questions that individuals have put up there, and Casey is our master of ceremonies. Casey, I'll let you start to work us through these questions, and we'll as a panel try to make sure that we do our best to provide a relevant answer.
All right, thank you. So the first question, are there organizations out there that are set up with attorneys as the principals, but people with process line management expertise as operational experts? This person said that this is what I am in, and I find it incredibly interesting to have the combination of legal and operational expertise in the same group.
Yeah, so Casey, this is Steve. I'll start the response. So in our organization, we have our Chief Ethics Compliance Officer and also Senior Vice President of Enterprise Risk Management. That's one role, and that is a role that sits on our executive committee, and that is a role that is probably going into the foreseeable future will always require a JD, just simply because of the enforcement environment in our industry and the technical requirements for legal analysis in that role. However, we have approximately 140 people across the world with distributed skills. Emily is one of those individuals with library and information sciences, very much data analytics, technical skills, and trying to bring those pieces together into a cohesive unit has really been our focus and our strategy the last few years. So I know we're representative of many larger organizations who have that mix.
Yeah, this is Christopher Michelson. I think the person who asked the question has it exactly right, that JD plus other operational skills that may not be associated with the JD is the way to build an effective function. For interest and also for data gathering, we sort of position this as JD or not JD, but it makes a lot of sense that you need both. Think like a lawyer doesn't always mean think like an ethicist. And by saying that, I'm not saying that law encourages us to be unethical, but I am saying that sometimes thinking like a lawyer puts risk mitigation ahead of ethics. So I think you need both.
Okay. Terrific insights, Christopher. Thank you. Casey, in the interest of time, can we go to the next one?
Yes, of course. Okay, next question. Let's see here. I think the role evolved over the last years. Previously, it was mostly compliance and not ethics. Now the importance of ethics direction is getting more and more important. However, from what I see, the ethics education is not seen as a strategically relevant education. Where do we think E&C experts should learn ethics at all?
Okay, so I actually would like to direct this question back to two of the preeminent leaders in ethics compliance. So we could go ahead and ask Suzanne, who has a JD from a preeminent university, and we could also go ahead and ask Jeff, who has a PhD in ethics from a preeminent university, your thoughts and insights on this.
So this is Suzanne. I'll jump in and then I'll turn it over to my partner, Jeff. I am a JD. I did not learn ethics in law school. I learned how to read statutes and regulations and interpret them in an advocacy role. But one of the skill gaps we've been able to fill successfully here at AT&T in the last 3.5 years is bringing on behavioralists onto the team. We have 2 people on our team with PhDs in different areas of psychology who work on our ethics program and stay up to date in practices in human behavior. And we have found that that's critical in our ethics function, and they've been able to take it to heights that we couldn't have even imagined 3 years ago. And to the discussion in the previous question, I firmly believe a diverse ethics and compliance staff with a makeup of a very differed educational and professional background is what makes a compliance program successful, and behavioral science and the true understanding of human behavior is a critical part of that diversification of your compliance and ethics staff. Jeff?
Thank you. Thank you, Susan. I think this question is also just a terrific question. And I would offer a couple of thoughts. I think the fact that the data shows that ethical reasoning or ethical training in some form or fashion is perhaps becoming more important might reflect a recognition that no matter how many laws and regulations we have, life is messy, and organizational life is messy as well. And there are always gray areas. There are always matters of judgment that the law and regulation doesn't definitively answer. And so a recognition that the law often leaves some really core questions unanswered along the lines of what Christopher was alluding to. I think the discipline of ethics is really a discipline focused on critical reasoning and integrated reasoning that references to, its point of reference is not the law, but normative principles of human conduct. I think one can learn that in a variety of different settings. It doesn't have to be, as I pursued it, a PhD in the discipline. But I think there are ways of teaching and learning that can contribute to these kinds of capabilities of critical thinking, integrated thinking, norms-based thinking as compared to law-based thinking.
Okay, great. Very, very thoughtful insights and perspective from both of you. Thank you. Casey, can we kind of move to the next 2 questions together? Because they seem to somewhat go together.
Okay, so what are some of the different professional certificates that are out there, and what are we seeing as current and relevant?
Okay, and how about we put that next question in there with it, because it somewhat goes together, I think.
Okay, and then are there parallels with the UK and US E&C profile requirements? And then also, are qualifications truly global, or do specific qualifications tend to be embedded in local legislation?
Yeah. So great questions, and I'll start, and I'll ask our expert panel to please weigh in quickly. So this has been one of the key questions we had of what are the standards and qualifications? And when you start to look at it educationally, we've already talked about they vary. From a certification perspective, they are extremely varied. It depends upon the industry, it depends upon the specific technical area, and it tends to be, from a certification, very much historically would start out with general principles of what is an effective ethics compliance program and what are the general expectations. But now it's getting down to the point of information security compliance requirements and very technical, detailed expectations. And part of the insight that we had as a working group as we went through the data and the information is that there is not a clear standard in the US or abroad of what it takes to get into the ethics compliance program from an external certification. And I think one of the things we're hoping to use this data and information to drive is an acceleration to standardize those expectations for certification. It may be formal university education, or it may be professional certifications that come through that. But one of the insights that we all have, we felt it before the project, the data validated, is we need to raise the bar on what those expectations are. So as Ernie stated, they're relevant and meaningful. So I'll stop there and invite the other co-chairs and the panelists to please weigh in.
Well, this is Ernie. All I would add to those excellent comments is that sometimes we talk about teams going through a cycle of forming, storming, norming, and performing. And I think our practice is probably in the norming phase. And this effort is part of that. And I do think that there's a lot of opportunity for educational institutions to get into the certificate process. There are good certificates out there, I think, but I don't think that there is that we have a good idea of what would benefit a person the most. But I think that probably a certificate that covers the essentials of ethics and compliance, as well as making people bilingual in terms of data analytics and business analytics. You know, I think that that's clearly, to me, seems to be a certificate that would be helpful, particularly for those of us who don't have JDs. And so I just think that we're kind of early entry into that market.
This is Jeff. I would just build on Ernie's comment that as important as a certificate-based model can be, and I think it's extraordinarily important to learn very, very specific technical skills, I think the strongest portfolio is a combination of highly specific technical skills, such as those that can be taught through a certificate program, and these broader fundamental capabilities that were at the beginning of the report that Christopher touched on, which I love, the importance of critical thinking, listening skills, and integrity. So I think the best portfolio is a combination of the two.
I'm going to piggyback on what Jeff just said. This is Christopher again, and somebody else mentioned sort of the presence or absence of the liberal arts in this report. I think that we're talking a lot about data analytics and technology to help us with the tactics of the job, and that's really important. But I also think that if you think about the value of critical thinking and just being able to anticipate and think big, that's a more strategic competency. So as much as we might use something like AI to do our jobs better, it's also the job of an ethics and compliance officer to think about what are the ethical implications of AI in general. There are lots of ethical issues that can come into play in an AI world that are strategic, not just to help us do our jobs better, but that possibly could be harmful to humanity. So we've got to be thinking about that strategically as well.
Yeah, no, Christopher, that's terrific insight. And as always, you are the master of driving us for critical thinking and self-reflection. So, you know, one of the things that I wish Paul Fiorelli were here to share, because he has been very vocal on, as we have gone through our data analysis, part of what Paul has really started to challenge the professionals and the academics on is how do we all step back and find a way to work together to really establish a consortium, so we don't have individual professional organizations or academic institutions exclusively competing for certificates, but rather collaborating and working together to really establish clear standards of something that's meaningful and achieves both the technical excellence that Ernie mentioned, but also the critical thinking that Jeff talked about. And, you know, the importance of having other technical qualifications such as a JD, which people still see as very, very important because of the word compliance in there. So, you know, I guess my hope would be that we could use this project and this experience as a way to go ahead and to accelerate our path forward on how we establish that consortium and how we work together. So I'm just watching the time. We are now at time. And what I would like to do is to again, thank all of our panelists for helping us today in the work on the project, everything that's been done, but also to ask each of you who are participating to please think about your ideas and sharing them back with our capabilities working group. We had hoped that we would write this great white paper and walk away and be done and be insightful, but I think for all of us, it's just fueled the fires of there's something here that's substantive and how do we move it forward, and we need your help. So we'll all be meeting those of us who are fellows with the Ethics Compliance Initiative in early January. Those of you who are fellows, please put your thinking cap on, because we're going to have a working session about the path forward. And those who aren't fellows who want to share your thoughts, please respond via the survey and the inputs that Casey will lead us through here in just a moment to please keep providing your insights and expertise. So with that, I'll hand it back to Casey to wrap things up.
All right, thank you, Steve. Thank you all to the working group for your hard work on this successful report, and also thank you everyone who joined today's webinar. We hope that you enjoyed the presentation and hope that you'll consider joining a ECI working group in the future. I will be opening new working groups for 2020 in January, so look out for an email for that. And in the next few minutes, we will be sending out an evaluation. It takes about 2 minutes that we would like you to complete. This will help us improving our future webinars. So again, thank you all to the working group, and thank you all for attending, and have a wonderful weekend.